Okay, hey all. Today we're going to be looking at the evolution of the pyramids, and you can follow along with your note if you want to. I've also posted this Prezi link separately in case you don't want to listen to my voice, so feel free to do that as well. So, in terms of pyramid evolution, the question we're going to be looking at is how did the pyramid form evolve and how exactly were they built? And this is really a question that you guys are going to be looking at on your own when you look at some different pyramid theories. So stage one of pyramid evolution actually has nothing to do with pyramids whatsoever. It's simply pits in the desert. And this is before 3100 BCE, where you start to have bodies being buried in simple pits in the desert with objects. So obviously it shows us that possessions were important to them. So there was some idea perhaps of an afterlife and something to do with later things that we'll see in ancient Egypt, certainly. But another really crucial thing is that this shows ancient Egyptian people that the dryness of the desert sand actually can preserve bodies. So we've got no mummification process here. That will happen very soon, but not quite yet. But you've actually got the kind of basis of the idea of mummification. And certainly they do go to the desert to look for natron when they start drying out bodies for mummification, which again, we'll look at a little bit later. The next stage in the process is mastabas. And mastabas kind of occur almost right after pits in the desert. They very soon realize like pits are not enough, we need something more. And so they start making these stone-lined mud brick tombs with burial chambers below the ground. So you can see a couple pictures here that I'm going to pull up. So you can see in this picture that this would be above ground, this entrance here, and then below the ground there would be a burial shaft and then a sarcophagus of sorts underneath. So this whole structure would be kind of solid, and then you would have a little bit of a chapel in here where you could go and give offerings or make prayers or whatever. And there was what is called a false door, and that was kind of the journey door into the afterlife. Again, very early on, before we've got any of the full process of the evolution of the afterlife and mummification. This is just another image, so you can see that there were some more elaborate ones with double burial tombs. And this is what one might have looked like from the outside. So the next stage is actually the step pyramid. So you can see here that in the step 3, the step pyramid of Saqqara, made by Djoser, was likely the world's first very large stone structure. Imhotep was the designer, and he designed what essentially is, as you can see here, a series of mastabas, just one on top of the other. So you have the beginnings of the creation of the pyramid structure, but you don't have a very smooth, classic kind of pyramid shape like they create later on. And actually this pyramid was buried until about the 1920s, just under sand, and then they managed to find it. And again, here you can see another image of that step pyramid of Saqqara. And this kind of shows you what the entire burial place would have looked like. So not just, sorry, burial complex, that was the word I'm looking for. So not just the simple pyramid, but you'd have an entire complex of areas within here where there would often be merchants and things like that, and you could go and you could worship at the pyramid yourself. But it was a whole kind of theme park almost towards death. It wasn't just the pyramid itself. Step 4 was the collapsed pyramid at Meidum, and this was built by King Snefru. And Snefru we'll see a lot. He's one who's really trying to create this pyramid structure, and he makes several attempts before getting it right. And you can see here, in terms of this pyramid, that the structure of it is all wrong. So he's trying for a true pyramid shape, but you can tell by these angles that it just would have been way too steep. So they start it and then they're like, nope, this is bad. And then they start creating a step pyramid and they're like, nope, forget it, never mind. We're moving on to something else. So you can see the beginnings of the evolution of a true pyramid form here without that actually existing quite yet. And again, this is sort of what it would have been. So it would have been almost like a step pyramid, but that with a casing around it. Stage 5 is the bent pyramid at Dashur, and again this was Snefru's second attempt. He was the king, so he obviously was not building them, but his kind of second attempt. But again, the angle is all wrong. So you can see here, he's like, okay, my last one obviously was too steep, so we need to change the angles. So he changes the angles, but again, the angle's not great. So you can see here it becomes bent because they changed the angle halfway up the pyramid to finish it off. So again, this is very important in terms of the evolution of the pyramid structure. And this just shows you sort of the offering place, the inside of the burial chamber, those kinds of things. But again, we're working towards the true pyramid form here. We're not quite there yet. Stage 6 is the red pyramid of Dashur, and this is where Snefru actually gets it right. And this is King Khufu's grandfather. Khufu, of course, is the king responsible for the Great Pyramid of Giza. But Snefru is the first to achieve that true pyramid shape, and you can see this red pyramid, called so by the sandstone that was used to create it because it looks red-ish. He creates the first true pyramid shape, and you can see he got the angles right here, and now they know the mathematics behind creating a true pyramid form as a burial chamber. So let's talk about the Great Pyramids themselves. So the Great Pyramid of King Khufu, and you will sometimes see this name as Cheops or other things, but I tend to use Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure as the names of the three kings. So this is made 2570 BCE, not that long after you've got just pits in the desert. So they are making this evolution very, very quickly. And as you probably looked at when you were looking at the Egyptian eras, really pyramids are old kingdom things. Yes, they still had pyramids in the Middle Kingdoms, but they were much smaller. But then when we move into the New Kingdom, you've got something else that we'll talk about. So Old Kingdoms is where pyramids really had their kind of zenith. They were at their height. So Khufu creates the largest true pyramid. This is the biggest one ever created. Approximately 2.5 million limestone blocks were used, and they were about 2 tons each. They also would have shone originally white in the sun, and I'll show you kind of a recreation of that. So we see these structures as these big, sandy, kind of almost falling apart, very impressive still, but sandstone sort of structures. And definitely at the time, they would not have looked like that at all. Also, you've got a burial chamber in the middle of the structure here. Very important that they evolved to make the burial chamber in the middle rather than below. And you can think probably they did that because they realized, first and foremost, pyramid is a big like, hello, there's gold and riches here. So big marker for thieves. Would have been really easy for them to be like, okay, so we know the tomb is below, we're just going to go down there and get all the goods. So once they put the tomb inside the pyramid itself, it is supposed to make it more difficult for thieves to get to those golds and riches, but of course, everything ends up being plundered in ancient Egypt, so none of that actually ends up working. Also, and we will, yes, be looking at aliens a little bit, the points of the pyramid were said to be aligned with the compass. You've got a lot of kind of conspiracy and mystery around, like, how did they do this? Why does it line up with the points of the compass? Why do the shadows cast, align with blah, blah, blah? Certainly we'll look at that idea of aliens having possibly had something to do with the building of the pyramid, but we're going to look at a lot of different pyramid theories because still to this day, they actually have no idea how they were built. You've got a lot of different theories. You've got a lot of Egyptologists who are like, oh yeah, for sure this was the way that it was built, but all Egyptologists tend to kind of think one thing or another thing. So there's no consensus, but we'll be looking at a lot of those different theories. So these are just some pictures of the Great Pyramid. This is how we see it today, of course. You used to be able to get really close, go inside, climb them. You can't do any of that stuff now. This just shows you kind of the scale of the Great Pyramid. So for, a very, very long time, they were, this Great Pyramid was the largest structure, man-made structure on Earth for a very long time. This recreation shows you how they would have looked. They would have been glistening white limestone casings with gold peaks on top. So you can imagine you're strolling through the desert and you've got this bright white, like blinding series of pyramids. It would have been very, very impressive. you know, if they still look like that today, they would be very impressive, but certainly at the time, very, very impressive for ancient Egyptians. And again, this just shows you what it would have looked like inside, that it would have been built as we see it with those sandstone or bricks, and then the limestone casing on top. And the limestone casing has since been plundered, and that's why we don't, you know, have any remnants of that. This just shows you the inside. So those burial chambers that they decided would be inside, you've kind of got a trick burial passage to the bottom there. And we will, as we look at religion, be talking about these air shafts and the purpose possibly of air shafts. Again, this is the king's tomb. So it's a whole complex. It's not just a pyramid in the middle of the desert. You've got a whole complex there with a courtyard and all of that. In terms of pyramid shape, why was this the shape they were going for? There's a lot of talk about why, possibly connected to a mound of creation. The upside down lotus flower sort of looks like a pyramid, so that idea. The idea of a ladder or a stairway to the gods. Also the idea that it mimics the sun's rays when they come down on Earth, sort of in a pyramid-like form from that center disc. Also, that it was important for communication with the gods, so the higher you would get, the easier it would be able to communicate with those gods. Another important thing is that pyramids, burial tombs, chambers, they were always on the western side of the Nile, always on the western side of the desert, because the sun rose in the east and set in the west into the underworld. And they make that constant cyclical journey. The sun, the god Ra, goes from the east to the west, and then he is reborn in the afterlife, and then cycles from the west to the east in the afterlife. So it was very important that as you died in the west, so you could follow Ra into the afterlife. The Valley of the Kings is what happens in the New Kingdom, and this is again on the west bank of the Nile, where tombs are dug into the rock face, and this was really to try and reduce grave robbing. So instead of having, again, these big glowing white, like, hello, there are riches here, monuments, they tried to make it a little bit more secretive by having these tombs buried into the rock face in the Valley of the Kings. But again, grave robbers get wise to this, and then they plunder all of those tombs. And one of the most famous, of course, is the tomb of Tutankhamun, whose tomb was actually not plundered. And the reason it wasn't plundered in ancient Egypt is probably because it wasn't very important, so it wasn't very big, so it wasn't that easy to find. All of the really big ones, those of, you know, Ramses and Tutmosis and all of those guys, those were plundered immediately, and they would have been huge. We recognize King Tut's tomb as being very significant and very large, simply because it was the only one that was found intact for us. If we had ever found the tomb of, you know, Ramses II intact, holy moly, it would have been crazy. The riches in there would have been insane in comparison to what was found in King Tut's tomb. So great that we've got the findings of King Tut, so we can see a little bit of what might have been a part of larger kings' tombs. But King Tut himself was not that important to Pharaoh, and we will talk about him a little bit more, but not that important to Pharaoh, just important because he did have that tomb that was unplundered in the Valley of the Kings. So that's how the pyramid form evolves, and as I said, we're really looking at the Old Kingdom here, a little bit into the New Kingdom, or sorry, into the Middle Kingdom, but that form evolves, and certainly it's very important for the afterlife, which we'll look at later on when we look at religion and mummification, but also important just in terms of the legacy left to us by ancient Egypt. But how were they actually built? So you guys are going to take a look at several different pyramid theories, and what you're going to do is you're going to choose the theory that you think makes the most sense to you. Not the theory that other people think makes the most sense, not the theory that the internet tells you is right, the theory that you think makes the most sense to you. So pull up the note that kind of explains that a little bit more, pull up the theories, start taking a look and analyzing them, and think, what are the problems, what are the issues, what are the things that make sense to me? And then that's connected to your first mini assignment, which is to tell me how you think the pyramids of Egypt were built. Okay? So, see you next time. Bye!